Well, thank you, Dan, and it is an honor and a privilege to be here, and really a joy to speak on behalf of the Southside Pregnancy Center, because for me, as I'm sure it is for a lot of you, saving mothers and their unborn children, it's not just a cause, it's not just an issue, it's personal. And I loved reading in the Christmas letter about Randy Heller, who's the board treasurer here. In fact, I think he's here tonight somewhere, right? And if you want to know why Randy is passionate about this ministry here, what you need to know is that 25 years ago, there was a teenage girl who found that she was pregnant. And because of a ministry like the Southside Pregnancy Center that came around her, supported her, she in 1992 gave birth to a son. And that baby boy, 4 days later, went home with Randy and his wife, Carol. And today, they can't imagine what life would be like without their son, Matthew, who's now 25 years old. Well, I too, 25 years ago, discovered that I was pregnant. And I wasn't like that teenage mother. I actually was married, and my husband and I very much wanted a child. And yet I remember when I first got pregnant that the idea that I was carrying a human being inside of me, that was somewhat surreal. I mean, it just didn't feel real at first. And so I remember going for that first ultrasound, and I remember looking up on the screen, and some of you can remember this. They weren't like they are today. They're much more fuzzy. But I could kind of make out the nose and the profile and what I thought were the fingers and toes. And then the nurse said to me, do you want to know the sex of your child? And my husband and I looked at each other, and we looked at the screen, and we're like, really? But yes, we want to know. We've never been able to say no to that. And so we found out then that we were having a boy. And at that moment, that bump in my belly became real. And it was my son, Nathan. And we called him Nathan from that point on. And I remember driving home, and tears just started streaming down my face as it began to just sink in that I was carrying my son inside of me. And I'm so glad that Southside Pregnancy Center has ultrasounds that they can give to these women who come in, especially those young mothers who are pregnant for the first time, so that they can see that baby. They can confront that lie that thing inside of you, it's just a clump of cells, it's just a fetus. No, they can see the truth in front of them, and it makes a huge difference. Well, fortunately, that first pregnancy went really smoothly. And on September 15th, 1992, I gave birth to my son, Nathan. I think there's a picture of him up there. And then about 2.5 years later, I gave birth to my second son, Stephen. And that's Stephen with his brother and his daddy back when he was born. And with both of those children, those pregnancies came at just the right time. We were ready to receive them into our home. We were excited. But pregnancy number 3 wasn't like that. You see, pregnancy number 3 was an unplanned pregnancy. And it came at an extremely inconvenient time because my husband and I were building a house. And when I say we were building a house, I don't mean we were just contracting out to somebody else to build a house for us. I mean we were building a house. I was general contracting it, and my husband, who is a teacher and has his summers off, well, I figured he could learn construction in his free time, right? Those of you who are in the trades, do not be offended. I have new respect for what you do. We got in way over our heads. We were completely overwhelmed, and that's when I found out that I was pregnant with our third child. And I know my first thought was, well, how is the house going to get painted? Because I was in the middle of doing that, and now I couldn't paint it anymore, and we didn't have money in the budget for a painter, and I just was kind of freaking out. And to make matters more complicated, we had just sold our house, and the new house wasn't ready, so we were living with friends. And they very much were hoping we would get this done quickly. And this whole experience has given me an awful lot of empathy for women who have unplanned pregnancies. But unlike a lot of women, I had a support system. I had a husband who loved me and said, honey, it's okay, we'll get through this, it'll be all right. And he wanted this child despite the fact that it seemed like an inconvenient time. And I had a church family that came around us and supported us. And I had friends that supported us. And after several weeks, the truth is, I began not only feeling a peace about it, but I got excited about having this baby. Well, then I woke up one morning, and completely to my surprise, there were some signs that I might be losing this baby. And I remember going to see my doctor, and I was like, well, what's going on? Am I miscarrying? What's happening? And I remember him saying to me, I don't know, but you will probably know in the next 24 to 48 hours. And sure enough, that evening, we were sitting around the dinner table, and I just got these incredible cramps, and I knew that I was losing this baby. And I started to cry, and my son Nathan, who was 5 years old at the time, he looked at me, and his first question to me was, Mom, do all moms cry? And I was like, yeah, sweetheart, we all cry sometimes. We all get sad. And he's like, well, why are you crying? And so I figured it'd probably be best just to tell him the truth. And so I did. I said, honey, you know the baby inside of Mommy? And he's like, yeah. I said, honey, I'm having these really bad pains in my tummy, and I just kind of think I might be losing it. He got really serious, and I remember he looked down at his feet, and it's probably just a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. And then he looked up, and he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, you know, Mom, God's the decider. And at that moment, it was like the God of the universe had just spoken through the lips of my 5-year-old son directly into my soul. And he had reminded me that he is sovereign over everything. He reminded me of Deuteronomy 32:29. There is no God besides me. I put to death and I bring to life. God is the author of life. And I knew that at that point that even if this horrible thing happened that I was dreading happened, that it would be okay. That God was good and he was in control and he had this. Well, I did miscarry, and I experienced the grief that mothers feel that have lost children. And it was awful. And I remember wondering, did I do something to cause this? And going to my doctor and saying, because I'd been painting before I knew I was pregnant, and I thought, well, maybe the paint fumes did it, maybe it was something I did. And I remember him saying to me, Julie, listen, almost always in these situations, it's a chromosomal abnormality. That's probably why you lost the baby. You shouldn't beat yourself up over it. And so I was able to let that go. But that experience of losing a child and the pain of it has made me understand on a different level what women who lose children go through. But you know, since then, I've just come into contact and I've befriended a lot of people who are post-abortive. And they've lost children, but they have on top of that they had a hand in it. And I've learned from my friends who are post-abortive the pain and the shame and everything that goes along with that. And I'm so glad that I serve a Savior that offers grace and forgiveness to every single one of us. And that's no different, no matter what our sin is. And abortion isn't any different. It's not outside of God's grace. And they've experienced that grace and love of their Savior. But that loss that they've experienced and that pain and everything, and me getting to know so many post-abortive women in the past several years, it's just really heightened that awareness and really the urgency to warn women against abortion. Well, in the following years, I actually had several more miscarriages. In fact, after about 6 years or so of trying to have that third child, my husband and I pretty much gave up. Our 2 boys, on the other hand, did not. And they kept praying, literally, almost every single night for a baby sister. They wanted a sister. And lo and behold, after about 7 years, I got pregnant and made it through those, the 3-month period when I would normally miscarry. And I was able to carry that baby to full term. And so then my daughter was born. There we go. And I tell you what, that changes your life to have children, doesn't it? You can know in your mind and have that conviction that the babies that you carry are made in God's image. and that they're fearfully and wonderfully made. And I tell you, that's no longer a theory to me, that's real. I can look into the eyes of my children, and today they're much larger than that. There they are. I see Nathan and Stephen and my daughter Elia, and nobody has to convince me of the sanctity of life. Nobody has to tell me that it is real, and I thank God for the miracle of life. But friends, we live in a culture of death. And I wouldn't need to be here tonight, and the Southside Pregnancy Center wouldn't need to exist if it weren't for the kind of culture of death that we live in, and if everyone had the kind of support system that I had when I was pregnant. And if it weren't for the breakdown of the family, the rejection of God's law, the devaluation of human life, and the crisis that women in this community and communities all over the country that they face, we wouldn't need pregnancy centers. But sadly, we live in a culture where 1 in every 5 pregnancies ends in abortion. And sadly, society doesn't provide any support for women in crisis pregnancies. It provides an extermination service. And so 1 million babies every single year, 58 to 60 million since Roe v. Wade, have been slaughtered in this country. And what's happening in this country is nothing short of a Holocaust. And maybe you're aware of what the church in Germany did when it was facing a Holocaust, the slaughter of the Jewish people. By and large, the church looked away. In fact, there's accounts of train cars being filled with people, Jewish people, heading to their extermination in these extermination camps, in the concentration camps. And they would often come through the countryside, sometimes on Sunday mornings, and the people in church would find that extremely upsetting to hear the screams of the people going to their death. And so you know what the church did? They turned the music up. They sang louder. Well, friends, the unborn can't scream. And their mothers often are so full of shame that they can't say anything either. And if God's people if we don't act, and if we don't bring attention to this, nobody else will. And I just want to commend each one of you for coming tonight. I know there's a lot of other things that you could be doing this evening, but you came here and you knew full well what we were going to be talking about. And so I want to thank you for that. And my guess is that you're here because you care. And you're here because you know that Jesus said, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me. And friends, that's a picture of the least of these in our culture. That's a baby at about 12 weeks of development. And as you can see, the profile is pretty complete. The brain is fully formed, and the baby can feel pain. The baby may even suck his thumb at this point. There's hair on the head. Its fingers and toes have soft nails growing on them, and the baby can and does sometimes silently cry. This baby is in its first trimester. Now, most abortions in this country occur during the first trimester, and it's easy to think, phew, it's just the first trimester, right? I mean, that's not so bad. I mean, the baby's just so small. Friends, this is a baby at 12 weeks. You know, Abby Johnson, she thought that it wasn't that big of a deal. Do you know Abby? Some of you probably have heard her story. She was a director of a Planned Parenthood clinic in Bryan, Texas for 8 years, and she really believed that she was doing women a service by providing them with safe abortions. That was until one fateful day in September 2009 when she was asked to assist in an ultrasound-guided abortion. And so it was her job to hold that ultrasound probe on the woman's belly while the doctor, so he could see what he was doing during the abortion. And she writes about that experience. And it's sometimes hard to hear this, but I think it's important that we face what's going on. So I'm going to read her account to you. As I took the ultrasound probe in hand and adjusted the settings on the machine, I argued with myself, I don't want to be here. I don't want to take part in an abortion. No, wrong attitude. I need to psych myself up for this task. I took a deep breath and I tried to tune into the music from the radio playing softly in the background. It's a good learning experience. I've never seen an ultrasound-guided abortion before, I told myself. Maybe this will help me when I counsel women. Besides, it'll be over in just a few minutes. I could not have imagined how the next 10 minutes would shake the foundation of my values and change the course of my life. I was expecting to see what I'd seen in past ultrasounds. Usually, depending on how far along the pregnancy was and how the fetus was turned, I'd see a leg or a head or some partial image of the torso, and I'd need to maneuver a bit to get the best possible image. But this time, the image was complete. I could see the entire perfect profile of a baby. It looks just like Grace at 12 weeks, I thought, surprised remembering my very first peek at my daughter 3 years before, snuggled securely inside my womb. The image now before me looked the same, only clearer, sharper. The details startled me. I could clearly see the profile of the head, both arms, legs, and even tiny fingers and toes. Perfect. And just that quickly, the flutter of the warm memory of Grace was replaced with a surge of anxiety. What am I about to see? My stomach tightened. I don't want to see what's about to happen. 13 weeks, I heard the nurse say, taking measurements to determine the fetus's age. Okay, the doctor said, looking at me, just hold the probe in place during the procedure so I can see what I'm doing. The cool air of the exam room left me feeling chilled. My eyes still glued to the image of this perfectly formed baby, I watched as a new image entered the video screen. The cannula, a straw-shaped instrument attached to the end of a suction tube, had been inserted into the uterus and was nearing the baby's side. It looked like an invader on the screen, out of place, wrong. It just looked wrong. My heart sped up, time slowed. I didn't want to look, but I didn't want to stop looking either. I couldn't not watch. I was horrified, but fascinated at the same time, like a gawker slowing as he drives past some horrific automobile wreck, not wanting to see a mangled body, but looking all the same. My eyes flew to the patient's face. Tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. I could see she was in pain. At first, the baby didn't seem aware of the cannula. It gently probed the baby's side, and for a quick second, I felt relief. Of course, I thought. The fetus doesn't feel pain. I had reassured countless women of this as I'd been taught by Planned Parenthood. The fetal tissue feels nothing as it's removed. Get a grip, Abby. This is a simple, quick medical procedure. My head was working hard to control my responses, but I couldn't shake an inner disquiet that was quickly mounting to horror as I watched the screen. The next movement was a sudden jerk of a tiny foot as the baby started kicking, as if it were trying to move away from the probing invader. As the cannula pressed its side, the baby began struggling to turn and twist away, and it seemed clear to me that it could feel the cannula, and it didn't like what it was feeling. And then the doctor's voice broke through, startling me. "Beam me up, Scotty," he said lightheartedly to the nurse. He was telling her to turn on the suction. In an abortion, the suction isn't turned on until the doctor feels he has a cannula in just the right place. I had a sudden urge to yell, "Stop!" to shake the woman and say, "Look at what is happening to your baby. Wake up, hurry, wake up, stop them." But even as I thought those words, I looked down at my own hand holding the probe. I was one of them performing this act. My eyes shot back to the screen again. The cannula was already being rotated by the doctor, and now I could see the tiny body violently twisting with it. For the briefest moment, the baby looked as if it were being wrung like a dishcloth, twirled and squeezed, and then it crumpled and began disappearing into the cannula before my eyes. And the last thing I saw was the tiny, perfectly formed backbone sucked into the tube, and then it was gone. And the uterus was empty, totally empty. I was frozen in disbelief. I felt too stunned and shaken to move. My hand was still on the patient's belly, and I had the sense that I had just taken something away from her with that hand. I'd robbed her, and my hand started to hurt. I felt actual physical pain. And right there, standing beside the table, my hand on the weeping woman's belly, this thought came from deep inside me: never again, never again. That abortion that Abby witnessed is the most common abortion done in the United States. And whenever I recount her story, the reaction's almost always the same. It's stunned silence. But I promise you that right now in this community, there are women with babies that look like that 12-week-old baby that we saw. And they're carrying that child inside of them, and they are considering this procedure. And most of them, quite frankly, have no idea what they're about to do. But though what I just described, that's the most common abortion procedure performed in the United States, that's not the only one. There are abortions being done in the second and, yes, the third trimester. And at this point, the baby's about 7 inches long. Its bones are harder. And so it can't just be suctioned out of the womb. It needs to actually be dismembered inside the womb and removed piece by piece. It's hard to face. There's about 90 to 100,000 abortions like that being performed in the United States every single year. And quite frankly, that almost makes a gas chamber seem humane by comparison. But it's not just the babies who are suffering from abortion. As believers, we know God has created a moral universe, and no one can take innocent human life without there being consequences. God said to Cain when he killed his brother Abel, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." And so when a mother concedes to an abortion, she hasn't solved a problem, she's created a far worse problem. I have a friend, her name's Nancy Cruiser, and she, when she was about 20 weeks along, discovered that her baby had Down syndrome. And her doctor told her that the best solution for that would be to have an abortion. And so on his urging, she went and got an abortion. But she said afterwards, "Julie, I was so depressed. It was unbelievable." And then she said every time I would smell lilacs, I would get sick to my stomach. You see, when she had been going into the abortion clinic to get her abortion, there were lilacs in full bloom. And then when she finally had a healthy baby boy, she found that at night when that baby would cry, she couldn't go comfort her baby. What she would do is pick up that baby and she'd have to give it to her husband, and she'd go downstairs, lie on a couch, and curl up in the fetal position. And she didn't know what was happening to her. She honestly couldn't figure it out. It took her several years. She even went to a counselor. And then it dawned on her that it was that abortion. And fortunately, through that experience, she came to know Jesus Christ and radically changed her life. And she realized that he had died for her sins, and she could experience forgiveness. But she said, "I'll never forget, Julie, when God urged me to Google second trimester abortion." And she said that was the first time I discovered what happens in a second trimester abortion. And she said, I was absolutely horrified. You see, the dirty little secret of the abortion industry is that abortion traumatizes women and it traumatizes men as well. According to the Elliott Institute, women who have abortions are 6 times more likely to commit suicide. They're 65% more likely to be at risk of long-term clinical depression. They're more likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric treatment, to suffer from sleeping disorders, generalized anxiety disorders, eating disorders, and to abuse alcohol and drugs. I have a friend, Ricky, who had an abortion in high school and then again in college. And she said, Julie, I really was convinced that that baby inside of me was just a clump of cells. She said, but you know what was so weird? After my second abortion, I was on a gurney, And they wheeled me into a recovery room, and there were 4 women who had just had abortions on one side of the wall, just like me. And then on the other wall, there were 4 other women on gurneys who had just had abortions. And she said, you know what was so weird? Every single one of us was crying. She said, but it wasn't like politely crying. She said, this was like that gut-wrenching, shoulder-heaving sobs. You see, as Blaise Pascal said, we know the truth not just by reason, by the heart, but by the heart. And you see, we can convince ourselves, and culture can tell us that that is not a human being made in the image of God inside of us. But our conscience tells us something different. And my friend who had those 2 abortions came to know Christ. And she's actually one of the most active pro-life leaders I've ever met. And God has worked good out of 2 horrible mistakes that she made. But she said, Julie, that loss, it never goes away. Recently, I wrote something about abortion to my blog, and I received the following comment from a reader. She said, I'm a believer, and I had an abortion in college. I was so scared to talk with my parents about it because they were very devout. It will be the one and only thing I will regret until the day I breathe my last breath. The magnitude of what I had done didn't hit me at first. It came months later. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I almost fainted in that moment. I broke down and I bawled and cried to God because it had finally come full circle. I ended up in a cycle of drinking all the time. I failed out of school. I was depressed, ruined relationships, and so much more. It's been 9 years, and I've been forgiven by my Lord, but my heart still mourns. I have a 5-year-old now, and I couldn't imagine a world without him. I wouldn't wish what I went through on my worst enemy, and I still don't understand how women can do this without batting an eye. My decision destroyed my life, my heart, and my soul, and I truly believe that had I not known Christ, I would not be here today enjoying my amazing little boy. This country doesn't need abortion. I didn't believe in it then. I don't believe in it now. And frankly, I wish I hadn't had such easy access to it. Friends, the Southside Pregnancy Center wants to spare women like this. It wants to rescue the fathers, too. And you want to know the amazing thing? The women getting abortions, they don't want the abortion, some of them, most of them, any more than we want them to get the abortion. You see, abortion almost always is an act of desperation and despair. 85% of the women who get abortions are not married. More than 50% are below the poverty line. But far greater than these 2 factors is the role that coercion plays in it. According to a 2004 study published in the Medical Science Monitor, 64% of women who abort felt pressured to do so. In her book, Real Women, Real Choices, Frederica Matthews Green writes that many women aren't having abortions because they're poor or because the child would interfere with school or career plans, but because the men in their lives tell them to do so. Matthews Green contacted hundreds of crisis pregnancy centers and talked to women all around the country about their decision to abort. These women spoke of being threatened with the loss of affection and support by the most important people in their lives, boyfriends, husbands, and parents. In fact, 88% of the women interviewed said that their trip to the abortion clinic was a capitulation, not a choice at all. They didn't feel empowered. They felt isolated, overwhelmed, and sad. Frederica Matthews Green concludes that no woman wants an abortion like she wants an ice cream cone or a Porsche. She wants an abortion as an animal caught in a trap wants to gnaw off its leg. So we have women getting abortions, being traumatized by those abortions. We have innocent children who are being killed before they even get a chance at life. And then there's fathers who sometimes paid for the abortions or they abandoned the mother when she needed them. And though you don't hear about it very often, those fathers experience very similar kinds of emotional trauma as the women do. I've talked to them. I've heard their stories. Abortion is decimating entire families. And what tonight's about is about rescuing those families. The fathers, the mothers, the children. It's about restoring families. It's about preventing this. And it's about bringing healing. What Southside Pregnancy Center does is a very holistic ministry. We heard Kathy talk about the Family Resource Center, where they strengthen families. There's relationship classes where you can teach families how to do things God's way, how to really thrive. There's mentoring for dads so that they're there when their partner gets pregnant. And there's material support for mothers. There's maternity clothes, and then the strollers and the diapers and all the things that they need after that baby's born. And then there's the medical ministry that gives pregnancy testing and ultrasounds, and maybe the most important piece of this whole thing is discussing options with women. Most women who come in considering abortion don't even realize what their options are. They don't realize that there's better options, and so that's what Southside Pregnancy Center does. It tells them about many life-saving options that they have. Yet it's easy, isn't it, to think this problem is so huge. What can I do? What can one person do? You know, it struck me that Jesus never said, whatever you did to the dying masses, you've done unto me. He said, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me. And then he said, you gave me water when I was thirsty. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I needed shelter, you took me in. God rescues people one person at a time. And so does Southside Pregnancy Center. It rescues people one person at a time. And what we can do is come alongside them and support them in what they're doing. They're doing life-saving rescue kind of mission. And so I want you to think about tonight, how could you give to be a part of this? What would be your best gift that you could give? Scriptural principles isn't that we give out of our excess, it's that we give sacrificially. And this is an amazing ministry. And so I hope you'll think about that. We have a special message from the chairman of the board here, Judge Chris Donnelly. I'd like you to just take a couple minutes and we're going to hear from him.
Hi, my name is Chris Donnelly. I'm sure you know me as the chairman of the board of directors of the Southside Pregnancy Center. As you may recall, last year I spoke to you at the banquet, and I talked about we are working on ending abortion one family at a time, one community at a time, one state at a time, and one nation at a time. I want to take this opportunity to update you from that vision. I'd like to have been there tonight, but unfortunately I can't. I'm at an out-of-town wedding, and so I prepared this video for you so that you can have an up-to-date information as to what's going on at Southside Pregnancy Center. As many of you know, over the course of this past year, we have purchased a brand new building. It's in excess of 12,000 square feet, and it's going to meet our every need for decades. It's been ordained by God. I wish I had the time to tell you how God was involved in this, but it's amazing. I will tell you that this building was sold to us by a pro-life man who has been in the pro-life movement all his life. He slashed the price of this building. In fact, he is financing us and is charging us only for the next 3 years what we'd be paying in rent, what we pay now. So it's just an incredible blessing, and we are moving forward with that now. In fact, we've had the architectural drawings that have been pretty much completed, and now I'm interviewing quite a few Christian contractors for the renovation. And so we are moving forward, and we're really hoping to get this done and moved in by the fall. And in the fall of this year, we're actually going to be hosting a statewide conference that's dedicated and seeking to end abortion in Illinois by the year 2020. So these are really exciting times. Friends, God is moving, and we want to be a part of that. And as I told you last year, I believe that abortion is going to end in my lifetime. And we are seeing in the past year movement in that direction, and I'm more convinced than ever that that's true. And so therefore, with our hard work and our sacrifice, we are going to make it happen. And so I'm asking you tonight to be extraordinarily generous. I'm asking you to do something perhaps beyond what you've ever done, is to really step out and support Southside Pregnancy Center. So in fact, that we can end abortion one family at a time, one community at a time, one state at a time, and one nation at a time. Thank you, and God bless you.
As Kathy mentioned, we have an incredible opportunity tonight because there is a matching grant of $300,000, and that means that everything that you give will be matched dollar for dollar up until $300,000. And wouldn't it be great to exceed that? and at least use up every single bit of that $300,000. And so I encourage you, take a look at that card and just prayerfully consider right now what you might be able to give. And I just want to bring your attention to two things. One is for some folks, there's the option of giving on a regular basis. And that's really a helpful thing because, as Kathy mentioned, there's going to be about, what did you say, $350 more per month? That's just in rent. There'll be more utilities bills. I mean, to run a ministry, you have regular costs, just like you do with your own home. And so if you're not a regular giver, would you consider being a regular monthly giver? Those people are huge to the ministry. And I know from talking to a lot of people that run nonprofits, if you can know that you can count on that money coming in, that's absolutely huge. So please consider that. Some of you, though, I know there's some in this room who probably already are monthly givers. You're regular givers, and I want to thank you for that. But I do want to encourage you tonight, because we have this incredible opportunity before us, to think about giving a little bit more. What can you give as maybe a one-time gift tonight that would help this ministry kind of get over the hump, especially with this new building, and again, give that life-saving service to so many people? I want to thank you so much for coming. Thank you for, again, supporting this ministry. God bless.